Chapter 6. My Childhood Escapades. As a young child growing up, somewhat isolated on the farm, I suppose I was mollycoddled. I was very close to my mum and dad and my grandparents. I did not have the opportunity to play with other children in Royton. After polio, I was crippled and I could not run very well. I started primary school at 4 and I had no preschool or nursery experiences. All my mum and dad told me that I did not take my coat off for the first 3 days, as I thought I would not be staying until I got used to the idea. I went for a special physiotherapy classes. I had to wear support calipers on my left ankle to walk. Well, it was more of a limp actually. And I was excused from all ball games at school. I felt very much loved, especially when I look back at the old black and white photographs of me and my Grandma Smith in my Grandma Smith's arms and her adoring expression of love. I still feel overwhelmed. Maybe it was because of my heart operation and my disability. I experienced a tremendous amount of love. I accepted it and soaked it up. It made me who I am today. When I started junior school, I did excel on the climbing frames and bars and ropes in the gym. My upper body strength was overcompensated for my disability. I just remembered another incident which could easily have been fatal when I was 4 or 5 years old. Even at such a young age, we were often playing out on the farm unsupervised. I remember it was one of those long, hot summer days. I was alone and I wandered into the dairy where the milk was bottled and stored ready to be delivered on our local milk round. It's stored in crates stacked up in what seemed like a giant fridge at least 6 foot high. I'd felt hot all day and unbothered. I still had a woolly jumper on for some reason. I decided to open the bottom door of the fridge where the crates were, but it was empty, so I stepped inside where it was lovely and cool, and I pulled the door to. But a bit shocked as everything went pitch black. And the door wouldn't open. There was no lock or handle on the inside. I don't remember anything else until I was in my mother's arms. When I was older, my mum told me how she had found me. She was in number 9 Thorpe, where we lived, preparing the tea, when she thought she could hear a very faint screaming. Number 9 is across the road, round the barn and up a hill to the rear of the main farmhouse, number 11, from where the dairy is. And it's said that a mother has an instinctive ability to hear her own baby's faint cries. She didn't know where the cry was coming from, but she was very worried and went outside, but the cry was still too faint. She searched the barn, but there the crying was even fainter. From there she thought it was coming from the farmhouse. As she walked over, she thought I must have fallen down the toilet. The toilet is an old brick building down the garden path, through a narrow open doorway, round a narrow bend, and there a wide wooden plank shelf with 2 round holes in it where 2 people could sit side by side over a deep hole in the ground. But I wasn't down there. The farmhouse toilet, which I often used, not with anyone else, actually backed onto the tractor shed, where next to another tractor shed is next to the dairy, and there's another toilet in there. But the screams are a little louder. There is another deep toilet and tractor shed where the farm workers go. She dashed round, but I wasn't there either. Eventually, she could hear my screams coming from the dairy, and she soon rescued me with great relief. Had I not been found soon, I could have suffocated or died from hypothermia. I was lucky again. Growing up on the farm, I became an excellent tree climber, building tree houses and ropes with pulleys and zip lines, as they're now known. My brother Trevor and I built dens in the hayloft and in the Dutch barn. The bales of hay were like large building bricks. They were usually stacked in the barn in layers, laid on alternate directions so they interlocked, forming a secure structure. One year, my older brother Trevor and his friend Ken and I decided to dig a tunnel in the bottom of the stack from the back. Dad and Grandad were out at cattle market all day, whilst we were unsupervised on the farm. Bales of formed compressed layers tied up with two tough Hessian strings. We started by cutting the two strings at the end of the first bale and pulling out the cakes of hay, getting rid of the evidence by feeding the hay to the cows, which were all chained up in the stalls, in the shippons all winter. When the first bale was removed, it left a tunnel about 12 inches high by 15 inches wide, and then, as I was the smallest, I crawled into the tunnel with a bicycle lamp and cut the next bale strings, squeezing the cakes of hay past my body into the tunnel and pushing them out with my feet. As I progressed, bale by bale, the tunnel got longer, and Trevor and Ken couldn't keep up with pulling the hay out. I didn't realise how far I'd gone, and that the tunnel was completely blocked behind me, until the lamp battery started dimming, and I was choking on the dust. It was a long time before I felt a bit of fresh air. Trevor and Ken were truly panicked. They thought I was lost. Another lucky escape. We dug tunnels in the sand pit on the hillside. Dad went crazy when I found out. He explained how dangerous the sand is. It collapses suddenly without warning, causing suffocation. There was a rope swing from the ridge of the barn roof. Inside the barn, I spent hours swinging across from loft to loft like Tarzan. I could climb a rope using my arms only. My childhood was a really exciting and adventurous time. I made lots of school friends, and they all wanted to come and play on the farm. Dad was visiting the cattle markets most days, and Mum had a full-time job, so my elder brother Trevor and I were pretty much left unsupervised throughout the school holidays, and we got up to all sorts. It was always Trevor who made all of our plans, and I always followed him. Trevor was the tallest boy in our school. He won the Athlete of the Year award. He was a top at all the sports, particularly swimming. I was proud to have such a brother. I admired him, looked up to him, and I wanted to be like him. But I was a polio cripple and couldn't take part in any sports. I was only a small boy, and he was my hero. Because of my disability and limited mobility, I was good on anything with wheels. From riding my tricycle, balanced on two wheels round corners, to building bogies and racing down hills, which I built out from old pram wheels and wood with my own design braking system. This led to my first serious crash. My bogie required a hill to roll down. The bigger the hill, the faster one went. Growing up on the farm, all the tracks were bumpy dirt tracks, so they're not very fast. But in the 60s, Thorpe Farm Estate was being built. The main access road, Herwood Drive, on the estate, which came up to Thorpe, up a steep hill, and it was already tarmacked before the houses were built, so it was free of traffic. I found this hill irresistible. At 12 years of age, I had a need for speed. At the bottom of the hill, there was a right-hand bend. Each time I came down, I went faster and faster until the solid tyres on the pram wheels lost traction and skidded round the bend. Even though I steered away from a parked transit van, I hit it head-on, going under the front bumper. My feet were on the crossbar for steering the front wheels when the right wheel hit the van's front left wheel, which pushed my right foot back, which raised my right knee, which impacted the van bumper as I was going underneath, stopping us dead. All the force was transferred through my right knee, which pushed my leg back, dissipating all that kinetic energy into my right hip. My right hip was smashed. The pain was like nothing I had experienced. I screamed and screamed. I could not move. The pain was something I had not imagined. Be so intense. Screaming must have been very alarming because people started coming out of the nearby houses. The ambulance soon arrived, and I was most insistent the pain was too much and I could not be moved. They must have sedated me before carefully lifting me onto a stretcher and putting me in the ambulance, then taking me to Royal Oldham Hospital, where I had to wait 4 hours because I'd eaten a big lunch, and you can't be given an anaesthetic until you have to be able to nil by mouth. When I came round, I had a plaster cast from my right ankle right up to my armpits, with a hole for my bottom and a cotton wool flap at the front. When Mum and Dad visited me on the ward, I had to ask them to creep in slowly because the vibrations from their footsteps on the wooden floorboards were too painful for me to bear. The use of a bedpan was another issue. I was too shy and embarrassed to let the nurses see my bits and pieces, so I would only go with assistance from my mum. Not an easy task trying to move onto a bedpan when I was stiff as a board from ankle to armpits. I mentioned tunnelling through the hay bales and digging tunnels in the sand. Well, I found a really big new concrete tunnel running under what used to be Royton Tip. It was about 5 foot diameter, and it's the River Irk Valley. It was culverted underneath the Holly Estate. It is now built. The tunnel exited was down a dirt track near Royton Cricket Club, so my brother and I decided to explore. There was no bars or railings guarding the entrance, so we just walked through. A couple of inches of trickling water. It was slippy and slimy, and it soon got dark. We came back the next day with candles and made it right through to the other end, about half a mile, at Albert Street. Unfortunately, there were bars fitted at this end to stop things from getting in. I found it difficult to walk, but then I had an idea. I brought my bogey into the tunnel, lit a candle, dripped some wax so it stuck on the front of the bogey, and I sat down with a 4 foot length piece of wood wedged across the 5 foot concrete pipe just above waist level. As I raised the wood, I could move it forwards, then lower it and pull myself forward. It worked very well. I could reach a considerable speed doing this, especially when coming back down the tunnel. This was great fun in the dark, with just a candle flickering in the breeze. I didn't know at the time, but there's a very high risk of methane gas under a tip containing all sorts of household waste. Methane is highly inflammable, and I had a lit candle and a naked flame, so I guess I was lucky again. I didn't even know it. When I was 11, we started gluing matchsticks together to make models. My elder brother started to build an ambitious task of a matchstick model of Blackpool Tower, but it kept collapsing. He gave up and said it could not be done. I watched with interest, and I could see that it had not been properly braced, triangulated. At this point, I had a light bulb moment which changed my life. I knew instinctively how it should be braced. Dad and Grandad saved all their matches from smoking for me, as it took them 2 years. It took me 2 years to build a 4 foot model of the tower. I have a vivid memory of going up Blackpool Tower. I must have been about 5 years of age, 4 or 5, with my mum and dad. The first level at the top is enclosed with windows. Then the next level is surrounded by strong railings, and they are G-shaped and about 4 inches apart. The G part sticks out over the edge. I didn't really notice or suspect anything when my dad picked me up and lifted me onto the railings on my back until he rolled me over and outwards, so I was face down, staring straight at the ground through the gaps. I just froze and stared. The funny thing is, I have never been scared of heights since. However, I did not know exactly what the tower looked like from a distance in detail. So our neighbour's family, who went to Blackpool every year for the holidays, asked them to send me a postcard with a picture detailing what the tower looks like. When the model was completed, everyone was amazed. Dad rang the Oldham Chronicle, the local newspaper. They sent a photographer, and I got my first taste of fame with an article on my achievement. There was a photograph of me and the Blackpool Tower. This light bulb moment taught me a very important lesson, that if I put my mind to it, I can achieve absolutely anything I want to. With perseverance and dedication, I've taken my 2 sons up Blackpool Tower when they were small, but they wouldn't let me near them. They ran around so I couldn't catch them. I'd already told them about my experience. Now they're grown up and they're both scared of heights. They won't even go up a ladder without knees knocking. A particular incident I remember, I took my little boys up Blackpool Tower. At the time, I was wearing metal caliper supports on both boots to enable me to walk. On the first deck of the tower, it is enclosed, and there's a piece of toughened glass in the floor which overhangs the edge of the building and gives you views looking vertically straight down to ground level. A group of vertigo sufferers were hanging around this perimeter, hardly daring to look down, all with very serious trembling faces, my wife and the kids included. It was obvious to me that the glass must have been toughened and unbreakable. I had an idea to run up and jump into the middle of the glass with our metal calipers making a right clatter. Well, everybody jumped back and screamed. In fact, the only last year, whilst attending a 5-day Euro skydiving training at Bigway Camp for learning to free fall skills, making your big formations, I won the prize for perseverance, and I have achieved quite a lot of remarkable things with perseverance throughout my lifetime. One of my favourite quotes from Mahatma Gandhi is, quote, "I have the belief that I can do it. I shall surely acquire the capacity to do it, even if I may not have it at the beginning." That's a quote, unquote. In my teenage years, I made an army-like assault course over the barn roof, up a telegraph pole which distributes the main free-phase electric supply. This pole was right against the gable end of the barn, and all the wires were pulling it away from the barn. So there was another pole across at the Dutch barn with 2 stabilising cables bracing the electricity pole. I realised that these 2 cables were not live, so I climbed up, being careful not to grab and touch the live cables. I climbed onto the bracing cables, feet on the bottom cable and holding onto the top cable, then shimmed across from pole to pole. There was a tendency for the cables to tilt backwards when you're at the centre section. The consequence of touching the live cables, 415 volts, 3-phase supply, while standing on the earth wire would have been instant death. Another lucky escape. As a young teenager, I had a good understanding of practical things. When I was about 10, I had an EE8 electrical education toy, which included resistors and capacitors and a diode, potentiometers and diagrammatic circuit boards with lots of components to build different circuits. I made a Morse code, a radio, electromagnet. I even made my own electric motor out of a knitting needle as the spindle, supported on crossed pins for the bearings, and used 2 cotton spools, bobbins, on the knitting needle spindle, one with a horizontal winding connected to brushes on the other spool. That was varnish insulated fine copper wire, which is like a thin strand of cotton. I got it out of an old TV, because they're full of electromagnets made of this wire. A pivoting electromagnet was between 2 permanent magnets connected to the second spool. the electromagnet was connected to the second spool, so the brushes changed polarity of the magnet as it spun. It should have been connected to a DC battery. I couldn't get it started, but I connected it to the 12-volt battery charger in the farmhouse, which obviously had more power. I plugged it in my grandma's kitchen, and it went spinning like crazy. My grandma was astonished. I'd replaced the old Wilex plug socket on the farmhouse with the new triangular ones that we have today, so I rewired all my grandma's sockets. During the summer haymaking, we camped out up the fields. We built a table with a bench and a fireplace on a thick stone flag with a brick oven underneath. We camped in the fenced area around the silage pit where the cattle would not tramp on the tent. There was an electric pylon there for the 132,000 volt CGB distribution lines. We rigged up a cold shower under the pylon from a nearby field drain, which we used a stirrup pump to fill a milk churn at the top of the hill and then siphon the water down a hose and watering can sprinkler on the end under the pylon so we could have a cold shower. We were often tempted to climb the pylon. We could climb through the barbed wire at the corner post and step irons all the way up to the top. We knew that high voltage was very dangerous and might, when the dew came, we could hear the insulator plates hissing and see the blue plasma glow at the end of the probes. We didn't dare climb up because we would have been in full view from miles around and someone would have surely called the police. When I was 16, that was the last time I camped on the field. I made a point of getting up at 4 a.m. at the first light. No one was about then, so I climbed right to the top of the pylon. I didn't like the look of the 6 live cables and the blue plasma glowing at the insulators, but I could see the top cable was earthed and it was obviously a lightning conductor, so I tried swinging out on it. I thought about shinning across to the next pylon, but from the top I could see the amount of sagging in the cable, which would be a problem at the other end getting up, and with my extra weight, who knows what could have happened. After I had completed the matchstick model of Blackpool Tower, I then realised I could achieve anything I put my mind to. We had moved into 96 Herwood Drive, a large brand new detached bungalow which was my dad's dream house. Built to Dad's own personal design and part of the deal with Horton and Kershaw Builders of Thorpe Farm Estate. Before this we lived at number 9 in a 2-bed very old house with just one coal fire for heating. The bath night was Friday night. Mum had purchased a new washing machine. It was a top loader with an agitator which rotated left and right in the tub. Before this we had a dolly tub and a mangle. The new washer had an electric immersion heater which could heat the water. This boiling water was emptied into the stainless steel buckets from the dairy, and Dad carried them upstairs and poured them into the bath. We only had cold running water in the house, pumped up from the well. And Trevor and I had our bath before bed. Then Mum got in the same water and had her bath, and finally Dad had the last bath. We moved into our brand new bungalow when I was 13 years old, and it was like staying in a luxury hotel. One day I was alone at home. Dad had gone to cattle market and Mum was back out at work. I decided to make my bedroom curtains electric. We had an old gramophone radio record player, and we had a new one for a new house. Bought a new one. So I asked if I could have the old one, which wasn't very good, so I took it to pieces for parts. First I took the speaker out and we wired it in parallel with the speaker on the new one, so we had sound from both sides of the lounge. Then I took the electric motor out, which I used to operate the curtains. I mounted it on a piece of plywood, then using my dad's Black & Decker drill, I drilled with a masonry bit and drilled holes in my new bedroom wall so I could roll plug and screw the plywood with the mortar on it to the back of the wall with a spindle protruding on the curtain side, behind the curtains. Then, using parts from a Meccano set, I made a bracket to support the spindle with a 4-inch pulley wheel attached to the mortar spindle with an electric motor to gear it down. Then a 1-inch wheel behind the 4-inch one on the same spindle attached to another pair of brackets behind the curtain rail each side of the window, each with a 1-inch wheel and with a loop of cord connecting them. So when I attached one curtain to the top loop and the other to the bottom loop, it would draw them together. My next problem was that my bedroom had 3 separate curtains, one for the middle and one for each side. So I neatly tore the middle one into 2 halves, then using my mum's new electric sewing machine, I sewed the 2 halves very neatly to the 2 sides. When my mum and dad were home from work, I took them to my room and demonstrated my electric curtains. I had thought I could just reverse the polarity of the current like a DC motor to cause them to close again, but that didn't work. Then I realised that this was an AC motor, and because the current was alternating at 50 Hz, it didn't make any difference and it wouldn't go on reverse. So I had to twist the elastic band from the spindle in a figure 8 over the drive wheel to make it go back the other way. This was all more bother than simply drawing the curtains by hand manually. So a few days later, a bit of polyfiller and paint, I put it all back as it was. That is the end of chapter 6. Continue chapter 7. My teenage school years. At school, I remember taking the 11 plus exam. It was the first exam I had ever taken. A pass got you into grammar school, and a fail sent you to a secondary. Dad said this exam was very important. I remember being all hot and flustered as I was so embarrassed. I failed miserably. I didn't answer a single question. I didn't realise when I was 11 that I could not read and write. No one had heard of my dyslexia. It wasn't diagnosed until I was about 45 years old. Only then, because I was taking my son, Joshua, to a weekly dyslexic class. In secondary school, I had to work out extra hard to catch up. I was the top of the class in woodwork and metalwork, physics and maths, and technical drawing. I was promoted from the dunce class to a GCE class in 3 subjects, which I passed with top grades. In woodwork, at 15 years of age, I designed and built a square, plate, glass coffee table. It was one of the most difficult pieces of carpentry I'd ever done. In mahogany, hardwood, 4 mitered half-tenon joints at the corners. These were most difficult joints to make, each one individually, but when I fitted them together, they fitted together with perfection, but when I fitted all 4 together, there was always one with a fraction of a millimetre gap. I spent hours shaving off fractions of a millimetre, all by hand, to get the 45-degree ends, to add up to 360 degrees. I still have this coffee table. It was used in our house in number 12 Thorpe until I rented it, furnished, and one tenant actually dropped a pint pot and smashed the plate glass. He threw the coffee table out into the firewood shed, and after many months of wondering where my table was, I found it underneath the firewood in perfect condition, a testament to the precision and strength of my handmade joints. It had needed a new glass. I also made all sorts of things in metalwork class at school. Steel tools, brass copper ornaments, a wrought iron scrollwork sign, which is still fixed to the outdoor wall of the farmhouse. I made a crossbow from a heavy leaf spring. This shot a bolt straight through the barn door. I also made a primitive musket-type gun without teacher's knowledge. I drilled the barrel on a lathe with a hole for a fuse. I loaded it with gunpowder from 3 penny bangers I made a bullet from a cut-down 6-inch nail, wound neatly with wax-coated cord to make it an airtight fit in the bore. I only fired it the once, but it went off with a terrific, deafening bang. I never did find the bullet. It was far too dangerous. Many years earlier, I was introduced to firearms. Many years later, I was introduced to firearms and joined Tameside Pistol Club. I got my firearm certificate and purchased a collection of large caliber handguns for competitive target shooting in 1990. In 1990 I joined Diggle Range, which is the only non-military range in Europe with a 1,000-yard shooting facility. All handguns were withdrawn soon after the Dunblane incidents, so now I only shoot rifles and shotguns. My first competition at Diggle was with a lever-action rifle. The object was to shoot 2 targets called falling man targets in the shortest time. It was beginner's luck, but I won, and the prize was a Rossi 38 lever-action rifle. I have had a natural affinity with sports shooting all my life. From my first toy bow and arrow with rubber stickers to shoot at windows, through to my homemade gun at school and leaf spring crossbow with a 300-pound pull. I have an accurate, balanced target longbow with sights and an Exocet compound bow with a 65-pound pull. That's the exact same model as Rambo uses in his films. I've taken my boys shooting up the fields when we were old enough to pull back the longbow, scored on targets. When you're in open fields, it's amazing to shoot an arrow up into the angle into the sky and just see how far it will reach. Simply aim straight up and watch it against the blue sky until it stops, turns round and falls back, lands in the grass nearby. Anyway, or sometimes it's a bit too close for comfort. Well, there was one time with my boys and I shot the compound bow. It was so fast the arrow went straight up, went straight through the target, and the bale of hay, and into a concrete wall behind. When we fired the Exocet ball straight up in the air, we watched it going up and up and up till we could see it no more. So we didn't know where it was or where it was going to come down. So I shouted, "Quick, dive under the tailgate of my pickup, because we don't know where it's coming down." I've never forgotten that. It landed just a few feet away. That's the end of chapter 7.